Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jason, and you're watching Jason Jensen Trains. Today, we are building a new kit. It is the 5th kit that I have released, and it is called Williams Propane. Now, let me put some images up on the screen for those of you who haven't seen it yet. All right, well, as you can see, this is a very exciting kit. I am just so thrilled about this because it's named after my son, William, who works with me practically every single day here in the shop. And as you can see, the kit is full of detail parts. And my son, Will, is a huge part of that. He does a lot of the design work for the 3D printed parts. Another thing that is so exciting about this kit is the steel cage that holds all the propane tanks. All right, well, we have a lot to do, so let's get to it. Okay, all of my bracing is done, and let me go over it quick with you on how I did it. I cut everything 2 at a time, so I took 2 pieces of bracing, and I started with the front wall and the back wall. And I simply started with the tallest piece, marked it, cut it, put those on the end. Then marked this piece, marked it, cut it, put those on the end. I then moved to these, and again, this is the front and the back, and I cut 4 pieces this length. All those were glued on. I then moved to the cross pieces. So again, I cut 2 the same length, glued those on, cut 2 the same length, glued those on. I then moved to all of the side walls. And again, cut 2 pieces the same length, glued those on. Cut this one, and this one. Then I moved to the really small walls. And this one. It's important to note that because there's lines cut in those walls, it'll want to curve. When you stain it, it'll want to curve this way. So you want your bracing to run the opposite direction of the lines to prevent it from warping. Now we'll stain the walls next, and I can't stress this enough. Go very thin. Go very thin when staining the walls because of all those lines that are carved in it. It will make it want to warp a little bit, and we don't want that. So with this, with the bracing the way that it is and a thin coat, you should be fine. For our stain, we're using murky brown, and this stain is from Best, and there is the web address. So like I'd mentioned before, go very thin. If you want it darker, you can just simply let it dry and then put a second coat or even a third coat. Make sure that you do not let the stain puddle up on the wall. Just try to spread it thin and evenly. This should prevent any warping. Okay, the stain is drying and I don't see any warping. If you are concerned about warping, you can simply flip the walls over and add some weights. Just make sure that it's on a flat surface and then add your weights. These are called 1, 2, 3 blocks, and I'll put a link in the description below so you can simply just click on the link and purchase these. These work great. I use them all the time. While we're waiting for these to dry, let's stain all of the strip wood that's in the kit. And again, we'll use murky brown, and we're just going to simply dip the wood in the stain. And then spread them out on your paper towel to make sure they don't stick together when they dry. Next, we're going to paint our walls. I'm painting the top portion of the wall desert sand, and the bottom portion will be burnt sienna. Now I measured up from the bottom 11/16 if anyone wants to do the same exact thing. We're going to start with desert sand. So I want to make it look like the paint is peeling. So I'm going to try to do individual boards. I'm just lightly dragging my brush over the boards. Let me show you what this looks like so far. So this one is done, and this one is not. I painted all the plastic windows that come in the kit. Well, I put a gray primer on them, then brushed on burnt sienna. Now with a sponge, I'm going to sponge on some iced coffee to make it look like the paint is peeling and the wood is showing through. And then I'll take a sponge and sponge all of this strip wood, which is the corner trim and the trim underneath the roof. And I'll use the burnt sienna for that. And we'll even sponge some of the wall sections. The big door in the front and the double door. Let's see, here is the front with the big double door, and then this is in the front next to it, and as a small double door. These are both supposed to be metal doors. So I sprayed this with a gray primer and then sponged on the burnt sienna, and I went kind of light over those metal doors because I just want it to look like rusted metal. Okay, I'll get these all cut out and we'll start to get everything glued in place. Okay, so I have glued on all of the frames around the doors and windows. And then after I get those glued in place, what I do is I paint the inside on both the doors and the windows. This one's a little special. You'll glue on the frame, and then there's an insert piece that you put on from the back. Okay, next we'll glue acetate onto the back of the windows, then put a window shade on, then glue the windows in place. And same with the bigger windows. You'll see here, we'll have to cut those out, put acetate on them, glue those in place. Then we can get our corner trim glued on and start to assemble our walls. Okay, so I have all of the windows and doors glued in, and I have to handle them very carefully because a lot of them I glued the doors open. and some of the windows. Okay, we'll start with the front wall and we'll glue it to the side wall. Now we'll let that dry for just a little bit, and we'll take this one and glue it to this one. I'll do it on this side so that you can see what I'm doing. And I'm using the grid on my mat here to make sure everything is nice and straight. Okay, we'll hold it there for a second. Let the glue set up. Well, as you can see, I've made quite a bit of progress. I've got my corner trim glued on, the trim around the top. All the windows are in. I wanted to show you a little trick that I do sometimes. Say if you have a large window and you cut the center of that out, instead of throwing that away, you can glue it onto the wall so that when you glue your door in, it doesn't fall through. It just makes it easier to glue. So keep that in mind. Like there's a big square piece that gets cut out right there. Save that, and you can glue it on the other side of this wall and glue your doors to it if you wanted to. Okay, next there's a piece in the kit like this, and we're going to glue that right there. It's going to help give the roof card a little bit more support. Now we're going to take the wood that's marked with red on the end, and we're just going to simply put a beam going across. And while we're at it, let's put a beam going through here. That'll help give the roof card a little bit more support. All right, let's get these glued in place. I almost forgot, our large windows get window sills glued onto them. So I just simply put a little bit of glue on the back, and we've got one back here. I'll quick show you something that I do when I'm putting together models, but I want to warn you, be very careful, especially how you handle your model. Be aware of doors that you have glued open, windows, very, very fragile. I have a file, and very slowly again, be very, very careful. Don't apply a lot of pressure. And let me show you the edge here. This just makes them sit really nice and level. There's no cracks. Now what we'll do is we'll paint the underside of this our trim color, and we'll paint the edges. And then get our roof cards all glued on. Okay, the roof cards are all on. I had to do some filing on the piece of trim that goes across the top underneath the overhang of the roof on both the front and the back. And actually, if you want to leave that trim off on the front and the back, I almost recommend leaving it off. With the overhang of the roof, you don't really see it, and it'll fit nice and flush on the roof. So, but it's up to you. If you do put that trim on there, File it at an angle, and you're probably going to have to file it down to half the thickness of the trim to get your card to sit nice and flush on there. Okay, now let's get some tar paper on this. Okay, next we're going to take some sandpaper. I'm using 150 grit. Now we can take some dry brush paint. I have a light sand and light gray. Maybe we'll just go with the light gray. Now I'm doing a little bit of brown. It's called chipping. Now we can move on to some pigments. And we're using City Dark Dust. Now we'll find a darker one. Let's use Winter's Soil. And now we'll take Farm Dark Earth. Now, let's get some signs put on this. Okay, my signs are on, and I did brush over some of them with some of the pigments that we just used. Now I'm working on adding some detail parts to this. I first sprayed the detail parts with a gray primer. Then I painted them, just gave them a thin coat of, sorry, I grabbed the wrong one, bittersweet chocolate. Just a dark brown will work. I then used two colors, mostly baby blue, but I did mix a drop of Blue Harbor with it. Because the two main signs have light blue in them, you'll see here. So let me show you this as an example. So you can see it has a base coat of the dark brown, then I sponged on the blue color, then I went over it a little bit with rust pigment. For this one, I cut into the roof on the two sides and the front, so you can see, and then peeled away the black construction paper, and then that just sits in there. We'll glue it in place. Next, we're going to build the little cage that holds all the propane tanks. So you have this piece, and then this gets folded, and I'll show you after it's painted. Then it gets a shelf glued in the center, and then there's a slightly larger piece that's bigger than the shelf, and it gets glued on top. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is get a gray primer sprayed on these pieces. After you have a gray primer sprayed on your piece, fold it. Fold the top and bottom in, then fold them back. Then this side, this side. So it'll end up looking like that. But first, open it up, and in the kit you'll see there's a piece of mesh. First we're going to spray a gray primer on this and then cut it to fit the inside of those doors. Okay, now we'll just let that dry. Next we're going to take baby blue and we're going to paint the outside of this. We don't have to paint the back because it's not really going to show. And it doesn't have to be solid. You can make it look like the blue paint is chipping off. And I'm going to paint the inside of the doors also. I guess I didn't need to paint the top because this gets glued on. A light dry brushing over the shelf. We'll just do a light dry brushing on the inside. Not too much, because the tanks get painted white and we want there to be a contrast against the sort of gray and the white tanks. It'll help show them off a little bit. First I took the piece of screen and just cut it right down the center, cut it in half. It helps to have a brand new sharp blade. Okay, then we're going to lay it on there. It might be easier to glue it first, then trim it after the glue dries. Let's try that. Hopefully you can see that. And then that's what it looks like from the front. Now we'll give that just a little bit longer to dry. Now I'm going to have one of the doors completely open. So this door, I'm going to glue the screen on the other side. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll show you when it's done what it looks like. Okay, now we'll go back to our first side and trim the screen. Now we'll trim the other side. Now let's start by gluing the bottom. Now we'll take the shelf I'm going to use white glue on this because I want to be able to have time to move it around a little bit. This does take a little bit of time to put together, but it's going to look really, really cool when it's done. Oh, I broke off the bottom. I broke the seal. So we'll just put a little bit of super glue on this. And close it up. Now that shelf gets put kind of high. Notice there's a pattern on the side. 5 circles, then a space, then all the circles below it. And there's the line on the door. That's where you want your shelf to be. Okay, now let's glue the top. So you want to take needle nose pliers and fold that door back. It doesn't open all the way, but that's enough because it's going to go right here. And let's get our propane tanks painted and glued in here. Oh, I almost forgot. Let's get the top glued on. Now the top should be flush to the back. There's a slight overhang on the front and side. I used white glue so that I could move it around and get it positioned exactly where I want it. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to lightly sponge on some off-white. I'm using light buttermilk. We want it to be very fine, very small dots. I'll show you what this looks like in just a second. Next, we're going to glue on the supports that go behind the sign. And they're easy to line up because there's 4 little tabs that stick down from the letters. And you're going to glue them on there. Now, I've made it really easy because I put these little tabs that stick out, and the sign rests on those tabs. So we're going to glue, there's 4 of them. We'll glue them on the back, and we'll line them up to those little tabs that come down from the lettering, and the sign will rest right on it. I'll show you after it's glued. There's no real easy way to do this. I just put glue on there, and then you want to do it from the back side so that you can make sure that it's straight up and down. Easier to move it with a knife. We've got one done. Just keep moving them around until they look like they're straight. Now we'll simply glue it to the rooftop. Okay, the last thing on the structure was to do the little meter box. It's 2 parts, so paint the bottom part gray and then the circle part white. And it is the same material that the bracing is made out of, so it'll be on the same sheet. Okay, next we're going to take the base. So you take the center out. That gets glued right in the front. And then you'll have to set your model on there. And this little rectangle gets put right outside of that side door. Okay, so let's paint that. I'm using slate gray. Well, first let's glue these pieces together. Now we can paint it. So we're just simply going to use slate gray. Well, we could mix a little bit of iced coffee with it, just to give it a warmer feel and look. That was probably not the right choice. I'm going to take desert sand. Oh, I like that better. I like that better. Okay, so do not use the iced coffee. What do we have here? Sand gray. Put a little bit of sand gray in it. Okay, that's good. Get my brush wet. Just making sure I get all the sides. I'm dipping my brush in the sand gray. So I'm just kind of sharpening my pencil by rubbing it over the sandpaper, and we'll take a brush and use that to dirty up our concrete. Now we'll sort of put this on our grid, make sure that it's square, and then line up the ruler on the grid. We're going to put lines that are 1 inch apart. Okay, now we'll take City Dark Dust. We could even take something a little darker, Winter Soil. Now let's get this glued on. Now we can start to glue on our details. All right, well, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. This kit is now available on my website at jasonjensentrains.com. And if you are a Patreon at the 2nd and 3rd tier level, you will receive a discount on the kit. The discount code can be found on my Patreon page at patreon.com/JasonJensenTrains. All right, well, until next time, stay motivated and happy modeling, everyone.